Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Indie Zone. My name is Kathy. Over the course of the more than 2 years that the Idaho versus Kohberger case has been proceeding, there have been a large number of filings, as the docket shows us, from both sides. Some from the state, some from the defense. Many of them have been motions. A large number of the motions have been ruled upon. Some have not as of yet. One motion that's been lingering out there that has not been discussed a lot as of yet is the state's motion to compel alibi defense from Mr. Kohberger. The issue began with the state of Idaho's filing back in 2023. It was actually a discovery request and then a notice of alibi. What the state did here was to ask Mr. Kohberger, look, if you're going to raise an alibi defense, you certainly are not required to. Fifth Amendment says you don't have to raise any sort of a defense at all, and you certainly don't have to take the stand. But if you are going to say that you were at another place in time and raise that as a defense to the crimes against you, you need to comport with 19519, which is an Idaho statute, and do as that statute says and provide us with the defense of alibi, what you intend to do to raise this defense. According to this statute, at any time after arraignment before a magistrate upon a complaint and upon written demand of the prosecuting attorney, which happened in this case back in 2023, the defendant shall serve within 10 days or at such different time as the court may direct upon the prosecuting attorney a written notice of his intention to offer the defense of alibi. So if the defendant is later going to use an alibi defense saying that there's no possible way I could be guilty of these crimes because I was not in the location of where these crimes occurred, then the defendant has to tell the prosecutor the specific place or places at which the defendant claims to have been at the time of the alleged offense and the names and addresses of the witnesses upon whom he intends to rely to establish such alibi. So if, for example, the defendant who is charged with a crime in New York City happened to be in Oklahoma on a business trip at the time that the crimes happened, he has to specifically say where in Oklahoma he was and give the names and addresses of those witnesses to whom he intends to call at trial to be able to corroborate, because he cannot be compelled to get on the stand himself. So he's got to do this through witness testimony. It's very powerful tool for a defendant to use when employed properly. But the issue here is that the defense filed an initial response, which the state felt was woefully inadequate, and that's when they came back and filed a motion to compel. And in it, the state basically said, look, you didn't comply with the statute. You need to comply with the statute, or judge, you got to prevent him from being able to raise this defense later. Or alternatively, this is very interesting, the only person who will be able to get on the stand is Mr. Kohberger himself. If he's not going to name the witnesses who can place him in an alternate location, then the only person who's qualified to get on the stand and to support this alibi defense is the defendant, Brian C. Kohberger. That's what the state of Idaho is asking for. Now, that is always a dangerous thing when a defendant takes the stand, because they don't just get up there and able to have a conversation with their attorney asking questions. They're then subject to cross-examination. And sometimes cross-examinations of defendants go really bad. Sometimes they go good, they're okay. Sometimes they're really bad. It's a big risk to take in a case like this. So what the defense did is they came back with what's called a supplemental They filed a notice of supplementation to their original response to the alibi defense. And they say here, it was filed on, if you want to read it, very interesting paper, April 17th, 2024 is when it was filed. And it says at the top of page 2, Mr. Kohberger was out driving in the early morning hours of November 13th, 2022, as he often did to hike and run and or see the moon and stars. He drove through the area south of Pullman, west of Moscow, Idaho, including in a park in Washington State. So saying here that he was nowhere near. Can't be me. I was nowhere near 1122 King Road, the early morning hours of when you say the crimes happened, because what the state's position is that the crimes occurred between approximately 4 o'clock a.m. and 4:25 a.m. But what about the witnesses? Who's going to be able to corroborate? Who's going to be able to place Mr. Kohberger in these locations? Nowhere near 1122 King Road. That's where the next section of this filing comes into play. Here, this is information that the public received for the first time when this document dropped. Mr. Kohberger intends to offer testimony of Ray, CSLI expert, cell phone, cell tower, and other radio frequency expert. Curriculum vitae of Mr. Ray, which is his resume, is attached, to show that Brian Kohberger's mobile device was south of Pullman, Washington, west of Moscow, Idaho, on November 13th, 2022, that Brian Kohberger's mobile device did not travel east on the Moscow-Pullman Highway in the early morning hours of November 13th, and thus could not be the vehicle captured on video along the Moscow-Pullman Highway near Floyd's cannabis shop. Now, all of this is important because the state has said that they were able to track this vehicle that was supposedly seen in the vicinity of 1122 King Road at the time that the crimes occurred, that was then called Suspect Vehicle 1, and furthermore believed to be Mr. Kohberger's car, by following his cell phone, which purportedly was in the car at the time. Mr. Ray here is purported to be an expert in this field, CSLI. He has already taken the stand one time when this matter was before change of venue, when it was in Latah County, but it was not as a trial expert. This defense of alibi has to be put on at trial. And before Mr. Ray will be able to get on the stand and testify to anything, he's got to pass a test to prove to Judge Stephen Hippler that he is qualified to serve as an expert in this field. And Mr. Ray, although he seemed to be to many people a very impressive witness on the stand when he was in front of the prior judge, Judge John Judge, that was not for the alibi defense, and it's a different judge right now. Judge Hippler has to look at every one of these expert witnesses and make a determination, both sides, whether or not they are expert witnesses under the law. And Mr. Ray has been declined when previously offered to serve as an expert witness before a judge in Colorado who felt that his protocols and the tools that he used with this cell phone tracking was unreliable. It was, in other words, to put it bluntly, junk science that you hear a lot of times to keep alleged experts out of getting in front of the jury. An expert witness is not testifying as to actual knowledge. Mr. Ray is not, at least in my reading of this supplemental alibi defense notification, that he was in the car with Mr. Kohberger and had actual knowledge, therefore, where he was every minute of the time when he was where he was traveling in the early morning hours of the 13th of November 2022. So he then is only a proposed expert witness, and that requires that he be deemed as an expert by the court. So what happens if Judge Hippler, like the judge in Colorado, decides that Mr. Ray is not qualified as an expert? Then what happens? He's the only person who's been listed here in the notice of alternative supplementation of the alibi defense. No one else has been listed so far, although the defense did say that they felt that they would be able to glean some testimony out of undisclosed as of yet prosecution witnesses. But let's just say that it's really only Cy Ray. Then according to what the state is saying, either this alibi defense has to be thrown out or Mr. Kohberger must be required to take the stand. I'm interested in learning what your thoughts and comments and opinions are. If you have any questions, please leave them, whatever side of the fence that you're on. I appreciate all comments, all feedback, and I want to thank you as always for joining us here today.